This is a no-waste method of making sourdough. There's no extra sourdough starter that has to be thrown away. Making sourdough is really a 3-day process, although hands-on, it's only about 30 minutes total over 3 days. So the night before, you want to mix up your bread. You take your container out of the refrigerator, and it's just got some scrapings in it. And you feed that with 55 grams of whole wheat flour or rye flour and 55 grams of warm water, and mix it up and leave it on the counter. I'm going to pause and do that right now. Okay, I've mixed the flour and water, and as you can see, it's pretty putty-like. It's pretty thick. So then I just tamp it down in the jar. I think I'll get a tripod to make this. It's impossible to hold it and do things one-handed. Anyway, tamp it down in the jar, and I have a rubber band marking where it comes to. Then I cover it, leave it sitting in a warm place in my kitchen overnight. In the morning, when you see your jar, it should look like this. There's bubbles. You can see the bubbles throughout, and it has increased in size. So where it was just below the rubber band when I put the oil or the flour and water in it, now it's puffed up above that. So this is a starter that's ready to be used in bread. The bread only has 4 ingredients: flour, water, the starter, and some salt. The purpose of the salt helps brown the bread. If you want to, you can leave it out, but it really makes it a better bread if you put the salt in. So we start with 310 grams of warm water, or cold water. It doesn't really have to be warm. 310 grams. Oops, I always go over just a little bit, and then I just dip out till I get close. 309, I'd rather have it a little on the wet side. 313, we'll go with it. And then I add the sourdough starter to it, and that takes 100 grams. So I'm going to zero out my scale and scrape out the starter. So, and my starter is floating in the bowl. That's also a good sign that it's ready to be used. This is kind of stickier than I usually have it, but that's okay. It's in the ballpark. Okay, 106, that's a little more than 100, but that's fine. And you can see in the jar, I just have some scrapings left, and I'm putting the jar back in the refrigerator until I need it again. And then we'll repeat that whole process, taking it out, feeding it with flour and water, and leaving it on the counter overnight. After the starter and water are mixed together, I add some sea salt. Doesn't have to be sea salt, but it shouldn't have iodine in it. Not sure why, but it shouldn't. And it's 8 grams of salt. Give it a quick stir, and then you start adding your flour. And I use whole wheat flour and bread flour, and this is the bread flour I use just because it's available at Island Market. A bread flour will have 12.7% or higher gluten content. That's what gives it the ability to stretch and hold the bubbles and give you a little bit of lightness to your bread so that you're not baking a hockey puck. And I start with my whole wheat flour first. Any good whole wheat flour will do. And I'm going to zero out my scale. I usually add 150 grams or thereabouts of whole wheat flour. Good enough. You're aiming for a total flour of 450 grams. So then I add the bread flour. Going up to a total of 450 grams. Okay, I've got 453 grams. Can take a little scooper out. 451, close enough. Okay, ingredients are in. Now I'm going to mix it. I use a Dutch, I don't know what it's called, a Dutch whisk. I guess that's it. You don't have to. You can use a spatula, you can use a spoon, you can use your hands. Mainly at this stage, you want to incorporate the flour into the water so that everything is wet. Okay, 30 minutes is up. Still the shaggy mess. But now we're going to turn it into real bread dough. And you do that by just grabbing, pinching, and pulling. Grab, pinch, and pull. I do this about 20 times, turning the bowl. Pinch and pull. It's been sitting for 30 minutes, and that's allowed the flour to get moist from the water in the dough. And at the beginning, the first pinch and pull, it was real easy to pull. Now it's really elastic and it's harder to pull. So after about 20 pinch and pulls, in which you can see it's just gotten really rubbery, then I flip it over, give it a spin in the bowl just to kind of stretch the surface, cover it up, and now leave it for a couple of hours. And again, 2 hours is kind of the minimum. It can go longer than that, but if you're going to leave and go to Costco, put it in the refrigerator and it'll hold for 10, 12 hours. Okay, we'll come back in 2 hours and see where it's at. Okay, the dough has been sitting about 2 hours. And if you look in here, it's spread out some, but it's also taller than it was. So now it's time for another stretch and fold, which just means pinch, pull, pinch, and pull. And again, I do it about 20 times. And by the 20th time, it's fighting me because the gluten is building the strength in the dough. So it reaches a point where you can't even pull it out from. Ugh. And this is really important to do this part and develop the gluten, because that's what gives you the air holes and keeps you from having a hockey puck. Okay, well, that's pretty stuff. So now it's stuck on the bottom of the bowl, and I'm spinning the bowl, and that just kind of stretches the skin on the top and helps sort of hold it firm, and then the air inside can puff it up like a little balloon. So now we cover it, leave it for 2 more hours, or 3 or 4, depending on how your life works out, and you carry on. After the second stretch and pull, I just left the dough sitting. And now you can see it's really puffed up. So now it's ready to go into the banneton and for the long rising session that'll happen in the refrigerator. So I usually just take it out of the bowl, slap it on the counter, and then stretch it a little bit. Pull it back together, and I'm tucking it really tightly underneath, and as you do, you can feel the surface of the bread getting resistant, kind of even more rubbery. So I tuck it in, sort of pulling it and tucking it at the same time. And try not to let it get too long. It has a tendency to want to become a foot-long hot dog. Then, once I've got it pulled up, I pull it toward me on the counter. It sort of sticks. And that again gives you that kind of tight surface where it's stretched itself. And then I put it in a banneton. And if you don't have a banneton, which no reason why you should, you can use any kind of a basket that's round, or if you want it oblong, you can use a bread pan. Whatever you use, line it with cloth so that the bread doesn't stick. Now I'm just going to cover it, and this is going to go in the refrigerator for overnight. In the morning when you're ready to bake, take your banneton out of the refrigerator, take the tea towel off of it, put your casserole dish in the oven, and preheat the oven and the dish to 450. I'm going to attempt to do this one-handed. When your pan is ragingly hot, 450, you take it out of the oven, you take your bread and dump it out upside down on parchment paper. And then you need to score it. People use razor blades and all kinds of things. I use a bread knife, and I make a long, just slightly off center cut into the bread about a half inch deep. Okay? And that allows it to have oven spring to open up when it hits the heat. I also spray it just with an all-purpose sprayer with clean water, obviously. Then I pick this up and drop it in the hot pan. I have to have both hands to do that. Hang on. Now it's in the pan, it's going in the oven for 20 minutes, and you can see the heat's already making it open up. The bread's been in the oven now for 20 minutes, and it's time to take the lid off and see what we've got. A nice loaf, it's really opened up. That slit is now about 6 inches across. And we need to close up the oven now and leave the bread for another 20 minutes so it gets nice and brown. So here it is, the finished loaf. And these are the marks of a good loaf. It opened up a lot in the oven, so we have a nice big oven spring, and you can see the volume of the loaf is pretty good. These bubbles, blisters on the side are from the water, and those blisters are what makes the crust crunchy and crumbly. It's got a nice browned bottom, sounds hollow, and this ear, this big thing is called an ear, and when when I first got the first ear on my loaf, I wished I could do a cartwheel, because that's the mark of a really successful loaf. So happy baking. Give it a try.